Hello and welcome to my first Euro bulletin of 2011. The new year's got underway precisely as expected. We had not even got 7 days in before the euro once again started to come under pressure from the market, and just as before, with bond yields of peripheral euro members reaching new highs, the Eurocrats in charge of this project show absolutely no sign of knowing how to effectively deal with the crisis, which is, of course, entirely of their own making. I believe at this point it would be useful to illustrate the completely different mindsets of politicians and investors. People like Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Sarkozy exhibit a paranoid bunker mentality. They gaze fearfully upon the outside world with suspicion and distrust. They see the foreign exchange markets and hedge funds as enemy entities engaged in repeated attacks on a single currency in an attempt to bring it down. This outlook is completely distorted and demonstrates a total lack of awareness of how markets work. I suppose we should expect nothing more from a group of people whose dealings with the outside world are far removed from the daily realities the rest of us have to face. So how do the markets really think? First of all, we have to get over the misconception that markets think at all. What we breezily label as the markets consist of the collective, aggregate viewpoints of untold thousands of individuals whose only common aim is to make a living for themselves. They can only hope to do this successfully when they evaluate investment decisions coldly and rationally and without prejudice. Granted, there may be many among them who are ideologically opposed to the single currency, who might even rejoice at its demise. But if they base their decision-making on their own personal ideological bias, they will be very quickly financially wiped out. They simply cannot afford to let feelings get in the way of the facts. This kind of thinking is a luxury only permitted to Europe's politicians, who believe they can somehow magically enforce rules for everything. Now, some people will draw attention to the likes of George Soros and his counterparts in various hedge funds who are rumoured to be mounting or planning a coordinated attack on the euro. That may well be the case. Soros has a background for this kind of activity in the past. He was, of course, responsible for the pound sterling having to leave the exchange rate mechanism, the forerunner of the euro, back in 1992, and netted himself a tidy profit in the process. It is easily conceivable that he may be in league with other fund managers who share a common intent to break the euro. But the important thing to realise is that such attacks are only ever contemplated against sick currencies. A currency that has something fundamentally wrong with it is a prime target for these financial hyenas. These people would never dream of taking on a currency like the Swiss franc, for it displays no weaknesses. As and when the euro does fail, which it will, Soros and his pals will be sure to get the blame for it. You can bank on that. But be under no illusion. The real villains are the politicians for creating this fundamentally unsound currency in the first place. The best paradigm to describe this behaviour is found in nature, and we never question it. The weakest and sickest members of the herd get picked off by predators. Markets work in exactly the same way. So when we see countries like Poland and Italy and Belgium struggling to sell their bonds, when we see the yields on those bonds ever rising, when we see the cost of insuring that debt against default ever increasing, this is not a consequence of any irrational prejudice on the part of international investors. All that is happening is that thousands of cold, calculating, rational people are forming an aggregate viewpoint that peripheral countries' debt is simply too risky to buy or hold, and that the euro is consequently in deep trouble. These investors are solely motivated by trying to increase, or at least preserve, their own wealth, and the judgment they have collectively come to is that this aim is best achieved by avoiding investments which are too risky. If they make the wrong decisions, then they'll pay for it. The prospect of personal loss or gain is always the best motivation for encouraging individuals to make sound choices. What we are seeing now is economists and investors telling us that the euro project is not working, and that it is quite literally falling apart. They have carefully done their sums, and this is the conclusion they have reached. The US dollar is in a pretty dire position in the great overall scheme of things. Yet on Friday, last week, and again this week, we see the euro dip below 130 against it. If the euro cannot even hold its own against a dollar that will itself collapse at some point, then the omens for it are not good at all. Yet this is a scenario that could have been so easily avoided. Had the conditions for membership of the Eurozone been properly enforced 12 years ago, when the currency was created, all this could have been avoided. The euro could have supplanted the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. But the power-hungry Eurocrats had their way. They set their sights on a large currency block rather than a stable one. And so this is how we got into the mess we are today. A simple case of refusing to accept the economic realities. And the really disturbing thing is that this mentality remains the same today as it was in 1999. These people never learn their lessons. But it is we who will have to somehow survive the wreckage of it all.